Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives. I'm Ciaran Bradley. On today's episode, we look at more of your questions in relation to the Gerry Hutch verdict and the Regency trial more widely. The trial had a seismic impact on the Irish legal system, and we look at the likely ramifications going forward. We also look at the future of Jonathan Dowdall, what the case has done for the Special Criminal Court's reputation, and much more. I just wanted to move on to something here that was raised by Tonton Zola 365, also a Championship manager legend, so that's great. Can the witnesses who corroborated Bonnie's whereabouts be charged with perjury, or is that something that just doesn't matter if the person is found guilty? And on a related matter here, a similar question on Twitter, a number of people, including the state-style witness, were basically judged to have lied to the court, I should say, during the trial. Is perjury something that ever gets prosecuted in this country? Can you give one example of someone prosecuted for perjury? Now, listen, we can go as far or as little on this as we want, but I just wanted to raise that as an issue. Mick?
Yeah, we can. I can give an example because there is one example of perjury that is quite fresh. It's a former hurler, an inter-county hurler, was jailed for 2 weeks, or was given a 2-week jail sentence a couple of weeks ago for perjury, not connection with this, but he gave false witness or a false statement, and he was pretty banjoed because there was evidence that he was lying. But I do want to say perjury, I mean, that probably was an outlier because there was evidence that shafted him or got him, really. But perjury is very hard to prove because you have to prove effectively what's in someone's mind and that they're specifically lying. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that people can make mistakes on the witness stand. And I think judges are very charitable about that. People can, look, I've been on a witness stand in libel trials. I've done 2 stints at the Disclosures Tribunal. Let me tell you, it's a very stressful time, and you're concentrating and everybody's looking at you and you're on the stand by yourself. It's extremely stressful. So mistakes can happen. So, there is a very high bar for perjury. So, the state can say, or the judges can say, we reject this evidence, but that doesn't, I know Paul's going to speak, that doesn't mean that, that people who are lying, it means that they just don't find it credible. You know what I mean? So, it's sort of like the whole mens rea, and, you have to intentionally lie rather than making a boo-boo or making a saying something wrong, which can't happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan Dowdall admitted on the stand that he lied before the Special Criminal Court, and then it was put to him by Brendan Grahan that he was a perjurer. Will that result in him being charged? I don't know, but he out and out was a proven perjurer. In relation to the 2 other witnesses in the case for Jason Barney, both of them took the stand to support his case that he was not the driver of the BMW that was part of picking up the hit team on the day, and specifically Flat Cap. And those 2 witnesses, Junie McGlynn said that she met with Jason Barney on the day, and she saw him at a time then if he was driving the car, then it wasn't him driving the car. I'm trying to sum it up very quickly. And then there was another witness who stated that he saw Jason Barney's father driving the car in the immediate aftermath of the Regency shooting. So Jason Barney is the person who put forward this defence that it was his father driving the car. And I just want to read out this quote from Miss Justice Harbour. She said, "By way of comment, this court was lied to in the most malevolent manner. A dead father has been implicated in the Regency by his son's witnesses. That anybody thought that these lies would be accepted by this court is quite frankly amazing. However, to be clear, the court is not relying on the fact that the court was lied to in determining the case against Jason Barney." I kind of took it to mean when she was speaking about the court was lied to in this malevolent manner, that really her ire was on the person who put forward the narrative in the first place, Jason Barney. So the lie was perpetrated by the accused man, Jason Barney, is what I took from that. Again, I don't know in that case whether, he's now being convicted. I don't know if he will face anything for perjury in relation to that. But she obviously took those lies very seriously because she went out of her way to say this court was lied to in the most malevolent manner. So it was something that she took very, very seriously. But I'd say that's probably the end of the matter. I'd be surprised if it was taken another step.
And yes, and I'll agree with you, Paul, there. And I'm just racking my head trying to think of examples. I do think I have been in cases before where judges have said, and I want this dealt with, or I want the Garda investigation. Miss Justice Tara Burns could have said that there and then. She didn't really make any, I want the DPP to look into this, or I demand an investigation. She has the power to order that. So, I think it is what it is. And look, I'm not saying it's inconsequential. Perjury, generally perjury is not inconsequential, but it's not the main focus. So I think it is what it is, basically.
Okay. Can I just would like to ask one question myself, actually, before we get on to the rest. And there are quite a few, so we'll get through them as quickly as we can. What are the ramifications, really, for the reputation of the Special Criminal Court from this week? Because I will say anecdotally, and from what I've heard and read, I think a lot of people were sort of heartened, really, by the fact that a case that was, flawed, that was brought against Gerry Hutch was found to be so, or certainly he was found to be not guilty. Is this, or what are the ramifications really for the Irish justice system? And we don't need to go into enormous depth, but I just wonder what your initial feelings are on that.
I kind of spoke to this on the last pod, but I basically felt that this was a good thing for the Special Criminal Court, for the argument of why it needs to exist. It all went in Gerry Hutch's favour. The judges forensically examined the evidence and they found him to be not guilty. So when people try to claim that it's a kangaroo court and a set-up and a stitch-up, well, that's been proven to be false in this case. They did judge the facts on their merit and they found that there was no case there. So I think it was a good day for the Special Criminal Court, and the argument as to, that it shouldn't exist, it doesn't hold water, I think. I think that's pretty much how I feel about it. I think had it gone the other way, there would have been legitimate questions. But when it comes to, I don't want to criticize any particular body, but when it comes to maybe how this case was prosecuted, there's maybe genuine questions, and maybe there'll be an inquiry into how it was all handled. I don't know, or not, but that's a different question. In terms of the court, I think they've proven its legitimacy.
And and there's always the sort of the wider picture. We know that for years, decades, various groups, including Sinn Féin, and there's still opposition to it, but Sinn Féin, would have voted against. It's voted. There's a vote in the Dáil. It's that every year they have to sort of re-vote in legislation to allow it to continue for another year. It might be a year, it might be a couple of years, but there's a regular vote. And previously, Sinn Féin would have voted against it. I think the last time they sort of abstained, and their attitude has softened and changed a bit. So look, I think this was a good day for the Special Criminal Court, and for the people's view of the Special Court and people's confidence in the Special Criminal Court. But lots of lawyers are still criticising it, but it's undoubtedly a good day. And taken with what I'm saying about the abstention and the vote in the Dáil about it, its reputation has probably risen as a result of this.
Okay. Now we come to, we've already mentioned him quite a lot, but there's a few questions around Jonathan Dowdall. Now, several of these have kind of been partially answered just around it, whether the DPP would use him again. So I don't think we need to kind of retread old ground there. But one that came from several people, and it's one that occurred to me as well, is Dowdall's acceptance onto the witness protection program now under threat?
Well, it was reported during the week that he had been accepted into the witness protection program. I think we have fairly firmly established that that's not the case, that he has not been accepted at this point. And I think if he were to be, it may not happen until the end of his sentence, which he's appealing as well. But just I had a story during the week that there were preparations for the possibility, but I think we, both Mick and myself, have established that he hasn't been accepted. And the question of the performance on the stand, whether that had any kind of impact on that, well, apparently it doesn't. He will be assessed otherwise. I still think that there are real threats to his life, and that has been established. But it's very possible that at the end of all of this, he may not be accepted into the program. And I think that would be an extraordinary possibility, but it is something that could happen, that could well happen.
Right, I'd agree with you. I don't think he has been accepted. Well, obviously, I've said he's going to be rejected. I think the story about him being accepted into it was wrong. I think he's still being assessed to it. I think the crimes he was involved in. See, what you've got to realise is, the guards, it's not, I'm going to pick a country because it won't be that. Say Italy, right? It's obviously not going to be Italy. But Italy has to let him in. And Italy has to say, okay, we're going to let this geezer in. Convicted of a very, very bad crime. Waterboarding and torturing. Do they necessarily, it won't be Italy again, would Italy necessarily want that sort of fella in their country? So I think it's very difficult for him. So the guards have to have that relationship with our various police forces. And if he is untrustworthy, just say he gets up to hijinks in the country he goes to. So personally, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to get into it.
What was the rest of the question? Sorry, was there something we missed?
The other one was really just around whether he'd be used by the DPP again, but I think we've probably established that's not going to happen.
No, we know he won't.
That's right.
Oh, not
yeah, to be honest, that would be the most remarkable thing in Irish legal history if that did happen, I think. Okay, another anonymous one around Dowdall here. It seems to me that Jonathan Dowdall's decision to go state witness not only caused the obvious issues at the trial, but also drove the DPP/prosecution strategy to say that he was the shooter. Without Jonathan Dowdall, they probably aren't as specific about him being a shooter and possibly a greater chance of conviction. What do you think?
I think we kind of did cover this a little bit. I think their case probably would have been that he was involved in the plotting of it, and they would have based it off the tapes. And as we've already discussed, the judges found that there was quite a lot in the tapes to actually suggest the opposite. So I think there probably would have been almost the exact same chances of him being found not guilty. Dowdall didn't help the case, but I think the case probably would have been, if the charge is still murder, the case would have just been weaker again, I think, overall.
Dowdall didn't only not help the case, he damaged the case. For me, and I do think there's zero chance that the state would have said, if they didn't have Dowdall's evidence, there is zero chance that Sean Glenn would have stood up and said, our case says that he was one of two men. Wouldn't have happened. So that shows how important it is. Let's remember, the decision had been made to charge Gerry Hutch with murder before Dowdall got, entered stage left. But he had a massive impact on the tactics and the strategy and the case put forward by the state. No, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Okay. And this one I found quite interesting. Now, obviously, we're not going to be naming names of but I'm still puzzled as to who tipped the police the wink about Dowdall. Everything we know started with him. Do you think it's possible that he was mouthing or bragging to somebody else? I wonder. That comes from Anonymous on Twitter. I wonder if either of you had a thought on that.
I don't know. Look, Paul, listen to him giving evidence. He does sound like a bit of a waffler. He does have what is it that he has a good welcome for himself? Bit like yourself, bit like all of us really, but he's got it in spades, shall we say. So, maybe he did. But obviously, it is fair to say the investigation did coalesce around him. He became the subject of the NSU, monitoring him. Even before they put the bug in, they were, following and stuff. So, did the guards get some intel? Was there a chiz who said something? It's a murky world and we'll never probably know what happened.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think that they were monitoring his movements in January, like prior to the Regency. So they were already looking at him. And they ultimately raided his house on suspicion that he was a member of the IRA. So he was maybe initially being investigated in relation to that. And then when they established, because they were watching him, when they established that he was meeting up with Gerry Hutch, perhaps they got I don't know, but I'm speculating here, perhaps they got a bit of a surprise that, Gerry Hutch is showing up at his house, and that's where the interest then increased. But they must have been they were looking at him originally, but I don't know how, but maybe there was, as you say, somebody saying something.
I've got a well-baked theory that I've just developed in the last 10 seconds. Remember all these visits to Pierce McCauley?
Yes.
I wonder, was he collated going in, or maybe there was something there? You know what I mean? Who knows? Maybe you never know how, it's trees come from acorns, and you give small bits of things. Who knows? Maybe that was one thing, maybe because he said he visited him twice, and wasn't it 14 times?
14.
Maybe they went, right, what's going on with this geezer here? So who knows? Maybe that was...
And he was interacting with Alan Ryan as well. Like, I mean, serious figures.
All right. Well, the next one is just on a related note to Dowdall. It comes from Scott. Brendan Grahan's cross-examination was top class. What was it like to be there, and did he get under Dowdall's skin? I can say for a certain, having been there for a while, that he definitely did. But Paul, you might start us off with this one.
Oh, he was absolutely exceptional. I mean, I think his name is well renowned even prior to this trial. I mean, he is a consummate professional, absolute expert of what he does. And I mean, we knew even before Jonathan Dowdall took the stand that it was going to be a blockbuster couple of days, that he was going to absolutely eviscerate him on the stand. And you know, he's a bit of a dramatic orator. Like when he's speaking, I think he speaks quite slowly and quite dramatically and quite loudly, and we took in almost every word he says, and I think he's very conscious of that. He's just a consummate professional, and I think he really did get under Dowdall's skin, and quite early on. I mean, Dowdall was frustrated from 5 minutes in and was telling everybody in the courtroom how badly he really didn't want to be there, and how long do I have to be here? And I mean, it didn't take much to bring him down, but Brendan Grahan was calm and collected and just simply, are you lying to this court, Mr. Dowdall? How can we believe anything you're saying? And he just hit him where it hurt. And I think it didn't take long before Dowdall broke, to be honest with you. But God, it was just incredible to watch every day. It was blockbuster stuff, and you nearly didn't want it to end. I'll leave it at that.
There's a number of barristers or senior counsel, I suppose, really, who I really like watching, and Brendan Grahan is one of them. There's a fellow called Patrick Gageby, who's a very well-known senior counsel. He mostly does defence. Dominic McGinn, brilliant. Can I tell you he's a senior counsel. I just want to tell you a very, very quick anecdote, and this is why I love court reporting, because and I always say this, they see things that we'll never see. So Dominic McGinn he's not a senior counsel, fantastic barrister, but he was I think he was the junior counsel in the Joe Riley trial back in 2007. And that was the first real case where it was all about mobile phone cell site analysis and everything. And there was this legal argument. The defence, I think it was Paddy Gageby, was it? I think Paddy Gageby was the defence, but they were trying to get the phone evidence ruled out because there was no, the argument was, it was illegal, they shouldn't have done it, and it wasn't licensed. The O2 wasn't licensed, right? And we were sitting there going, oh, Jesus. And they were all about, but O2, is it a licensed company? It was all a great argument. And Donny again just stood up, right? And he went, well, if it's not licensed, then this act doesn't apply to it, right? So in other words, there was no problem, right? And I was going, holy shit, that's just fantastic legal argument, right? And I love watching barristers. Brendan Grahan is fantastic. He actually did the Anna Creashiel trial, but as a prosecutor. Right, and he's one of the judges, as I say, Dominic McGinn, various ones, Sean Gearan, who prosecuted Dwyer. I would actually urge any listener to go in and just pick a case and watch a senior counsel, because they're brilliant. But anyway, Brendan Grahan was brilliant, and he's one of the most sort of stay prosecution defence. He switches between the both of them, and for me, there's a great honour in that he gives us all for the state and for the defence. Is brilliant. But I would just urge people to go in, pick a trial and sit down and just watch barristers, because see, at that level, it's amazing to watch.
It's amazing. I mean, and he was incredible at catching Dowdall in his own lies. Simply just putting his own words back to him, he was able to get him to slip up again and again and again. He was just giving him everything he wanted, because he was, to give the example, speaking about what day was it when you had this confession, when Gerry Hutch confessed to you in the park, and he put the evidence of Sarah Sked to him, and then Dowdall said something like, well, it wasn't the 8th, was it? And then Grahan was like, well, which one was it? Are we now doing this to suit your narrative? You're changing your story again. And he just continually did that to him throughout the 4 days, I think it was, that he cross-examined him, caught him out in each and every one of his lies, and even got him to admit at one stage that he lied to the Special Criminal Court. Incredible stuff.
Yeah, it was. And you can't help but think that if you're in Dowdall's position, under an enormous amount of stress, you need to be so deliberate with what you're saying and really keeping yourself as cool as he can. But obviously, as we all know, witnesses get flustered, as is completely natural. But yeah, Grahan and Dowdall were having certainly a tete-a-tete. It was like a dance, you know, like it really is. It's a remarkable thing seeing a barrister in full flow. Just to move on to Ian's question here. After spending 1 year in custody on remand to be found not guilty, is Hutch entitled to some sort of compensation against the state for the inconvenience of it all?
No. No, basically.
We might, sorry, just on this point as well, I don't mean to cut across you, Mick. We might talk about the legal aid issue here as well. I think that was something that came to all of our DMs.
Yes, because somebody DM'd me because I mentioned in a previous pod about you get legal aid for murder. So I just realised, I was looking back because Paul and I were both in court in September 2021 when Gerry Hutch was brought back from Spain. Now, the way it happens is we've covered enough murder trials between us. You're brought to the district, usually a district court, except when you're going to the special, when you go straight to the special. But in a murder case, the first place you go to is the district court, and they send you forward to the Central Criminal Court. Now, I've been in hundreds of court cases, first appearances like that, and you always hear the same thing. It's always there's the preliminary, there's refused bail, or you can't get bail for murder at the district court. But you hear evidence of arrest charge and all that sort of stuff. And it's always at the end the solicitor would stand up and say, "Judge, you make an application for legal aid," and it didn't happen in this case. Gerry Hutch did not apply for legal aid. So he effectively appointed his own legal team. Now, so that's very expensive because barristers don't come cheap. And did Gerry Hutch have two senior counsel, or was it just one?
Just one.
Just one, but he had two. They probably had two juniors or BLs.
It's two juniors, right? Definitely at least.
Let me tell you, this is not cheap. And it was a 51-day trial, wasn't it?
52, yeah.
52, and we're talking a lot of spondylics, hundreds of thousands of euro, effectively for the whole legal case. But I was speaking to the Simon barrister again, who keeps me right, and basically they said, yeah, he didn't apply for. He wasn't. They weren't involved in the case, but they know things. They said no, yeah, Gerry Hutch did not apply for legal aid, but what he can do now, and I think this has already been said at the end of the trial, Paul, that he can apply for his costs retrospectively because he won. If he didn't win, he was in bother. He was bothered for a lot of reasons, but financially as well. But now that he has been declared innocent and declared not guilty, he can go to the court, and I think he has done this, to apply for his costs to come back. But it's one of the few, and I actually asked lots of experienced full-time court reporters. Paul and I would do a lot of courts, but we're not full-time court reporters. Have they ever come across a case where firstly a murder accused didn't apply for legal aid and secondly didn't get it, and none of them, stretching back decades, none of them could remember any? So I think this is a unique aspect here.
Yeah. Did that person ask about his detention as well? That would he take a case for being detained all that time? Is that what the...
Yeah, sorry, yeah. There was a question around him being in custody for a year and then being found not guilty.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, I don't think he ever applied for bail. So he didn't even challenge his detention. So I would be surprised if he then turned around and said, you have me in prison all that time, because I actually don't even think he applied for bail. He
did go to the Supreme Court because he wanted the case to be heard in front of a jury.
Yes.
But that's obviously not a bail application. That's a very good point, Paul. Did he apply for... I don't think he did.
He never went to the High Court to apply for bail.
But even if he did...
Can't really turn.
Yeah, but
can't
even
really turn
if he
around
had
then and give out about it. But
refused.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any chance of that. There's not a chance at all.
Okay, just to come on to one. Look, I think we were all sort of familiar with the fact that this was almost a bit of a melodrama, this case, and at times it's easy to lose sight of the fact that this is not easy to lose sight of, but this is an extremely serious thing that happened at the Regency. A man lost his life. Leanne here has mentioned a question that I've been pondering myself. Do you think people, particularly young people, will romanticize Gerry Hutch because of what he has done in the past? And she also mentions here how he conducted himself in his primetime interview in 2008. I'm interested as to your feelings on this because, not to labour the point too much, there's certainly a lot of lionising that's happened of Gerry Hutch over the last few months, some for good reason, some for not so good reason. I wonder what your feelings are on how romanticised Gerry Hutch is now.
I think he is Massively so. And even while he was on trial, I mean, people would be sending you memes of him and clips from the infamous 2008 video. And I mean, people often have a laugh with some of the things that he says in that interview with Paul Reynolds. You know, if it barks, it's a dog. Or, why do people believe these things about me? Well, because they read it in the papers. I'm beginning to believe it. Beginning to believe that I did it myself. And
but I didn't. Did you notice that? He said very quickly afterwards, but I didn't.
But hands up, I didn't do it. Yeah, he says. I mean, it's classic stuff. It makes us all laugh. But I think people then use that in a way to romanticize him and say, well, you know, isn't it great, this ordinary, decent criminal sort of narrative and this Robin Hood figure, and people kind of saw him as a figure of he's the guy that's sticking it to the man, you know, and he's getting away with it in relation to, you know, when he was accused of the Brinks and Marino Marsh robberies. He did settle with the Criminal Assets Bureau. There were legitimate questions over where did all of your millions came from. He claimed it all came from property. And a lot of people do, for some bizarre reason, look up to him, and probably even more so now. Look, he was found not guilty of murder, but I do think it's a bit bizarre that people would in some way romanticize this figure and look up to him in some way.
Well, that's because they don't know the reality, and they have a picture of him, and probably the nickname the Monk has helped copper fasten that picture of him, you know, no drugs and drinks and all that sort of stuff. Look, you know, courts did hear he was involved in 2 very, very serious robberies when they got millions of quid. He had dozens of criminal convictions before that for robbery and larceny, and you know, pretty heavy enough crimes. So, and he had a long career. But you know what? When I think of him, right, I think of lots of things, but I think of a 15-year-old boy being sent to an adult prison, and I still find that shocking. I really, really find it shocking. Imagine a 15-year-old kid. My young fella's, my daughter's 17 going 18, but my young fella's 14, nearly 15. And it's shocking. It is really, really shocking that would happen in Ireland. I know it was in the early 80s. Yeah, it was early 80s. Still, late 70s. That's grim. That's in Ireland. Terrible.
I was struck. Sorry, I just rewatched the primetime interview the other night, and I was so struck by that. Like, I mean, really, that is, you know, there are points in everyone's life that are sort of forks in the road, I suppose, and that could have been so traumatic. And actually, just on a separate point that we mentioned in podcasts before, Hutch himself was very not enamored with this whole Team Hutch dynamic and stuff that was coming up. I think he was quite aware of the severity of what had happened and the personal cost. And obviously this came, I believe those conversations were quite soon after his brother Eddie was murdered. I just think that this is something we need to temper a little bit here, and do remember that, you know, this is a very, very serious situation that people have got themselves in. This has cost people many of their lives. But anyway, all right, we'll move on a little bit to Jason Bonnie and Paul Murphy. There's a few questions here. Anonymous one on Twitter saying, am I right in thinking that Bonnie and Murphy were not the only getaway drivers? You are. There was one for each of the assault team. I presume, you know, the inference here is that other people are involved. And I guess, do we feel that other people will now face charges in any sense?
Yeah. No, there was a convoy of 6 vehicles that picked up each one of the 6 hitmen. Jason Bonnie has been found guilty of picking up Kevin Murray flat cap. We actually don't know who Paul Murphy picked up. And then there were other drivers who may well be looked into. In relation to the judgment, we learned that investigators were looking at a vehicle in connection with Jonathan Hutch, who is a nephew of Gerry Hutch. He's not being charged with any offence, but there was the guards were looking at a car in relation to him, which they suspected might have been a car involved in the convoy. So he's one individual that they were looking at. It's a good time to bring up this Dirty Dozen. Can I bring them up? Right, so Gerry Hutch was allegedly one, then Patsy, then Jonathan Hutch. You've got Jonathan Dowdall, Patrick Dowdall, James Mago Gately, Eddie Hutch, Paul Murphy, Jason Bonney, Kevin Murray then, and Patrick Hutch Jr. That's 11 people. Can't figure out who the 12th is, but that's 11 people who have each been accused of involvement in the Regency. But in terms of drivers then...
Well, I know who the Kinnans think was involved.
Well, in the evidence presented in court, Patsy was alleged to have said that he drove the van, the silver transit van. Jonathan Hutch was investigated for being one of the cars involved, and then so was Eddie Hutch, Paul Murphy, and Jason Bonney. How many is that? Yeah, so those are the names that have been raised. But it's an interesting question now as to whether any of those individuals might be investigated further.
Do you not think that the strongest possibilities are for the facilitating the drivers? Because look, I remember watching in the Patrick Hutch trial. I know it's one of the things that stays with me. There were 6 cars, 5 turned away from Dublin and 1 turned towards Dublin, or was it the way around? 1 car went one way and the other 5 went the other way. But do you remember I don't know, I'm sure the CCTV would play to you of the cars leaving in the convoy and stuff. So I always remember thinking, right, unless those, I know we all heard the whole thing about cloning. So I've always thought that was the best. And guards would always say this: you go in for an investigation from the outside in and get what you can on the periphery. So for me, it's all about the getaway cars. Effectively, that's their best bet.
Yeah, and now that they have actually successfully prosecuted 2 people in relation to that, perhaps they'll go after the rest on the basis of the footage.
Okay. There's one here, and we can go as far as we want, depending on the sensitivity of this. But do you think the alleged collusion between Garda Superintendent John Murphy and some individuals within the Hutch Group will have any bearing on any possible future charges against members of the Hutch family?
So what's happened is the guards have finished the investigative. We know that John Murphy and Gerry Hutch were both arrested. Gerry Hutch was arrested in September 2022, late September 2022, before the trial started. John Murphy was arrested in February, and it's all about that sort of nexus. I think, and so what's happened is the investigation has been completed, the investigative phase, and they're now working on the file. And look, these files are very complex, so I can understand why they haven't finished their investigations and sent it. They have to put the case together and paint a picture for the DPP to persuade the DPP to proffer charges. So that, for me, it'll be months and months before that happens and the DPP makes a decision. But a file will be sent to the DPP. I think this verdict has changed everything in relation to Gerry Hutch. I find it very unlikely that he will be charged with anything in relation to that John Murphy, Gerry Hutch investigation. I just think it's changed things for me, and it's very, very unlikely. So that for me is the biggest charge, or the biggest change as a result of this verdict. I think it'll be very, I just think DPP and all, they're only human. I think the bar has been raised significantly now because of this verdict, and I'll tell you why. Imagine if they tried and do him for this murder, fail. I think, once bitten, twice shy. Will they go again and just say they're not overly happy? Look, I might be wrong. There might be, the DPP will come to their own decision. But I, and people I've been speaking to, think that the bar has been raised significantly in relation to that charge.
I think that's. I'm just commenting on what Mick has said. I'm surprised that you've gone that far as to think that they may not prosecute him at all in relation to the John Murphy thing. Yes, you're thinking that now.
I think it's much less likely now than it was last Friday.
Right. Wow.
Now, come here. It might. What I'm saying, I'm not going to talk about John Murphy. They'll deal with him. But listen, I can only give you the guidance that I'm given. This has changed things. There's still I'm saying it's much less likely now than it was the last Friday for a charge. That's all I'll say. It might happen, but we look at things in odds and go, well, this is likely. I think it's less likely now than it was before.
Okay, we have another one here from Seamus La. Do we know if the Kinnans still have a price on Gerry Hutch's head? Now, I'm just wary, just with the tone of some of these questions as well, that it's important again to reiterate the severity of this situation for real life individuals. So I don't want this to kind of dramatize and become a sort of Wild West thing. But obviously one of the corollaries of this trial is that it has the potential to reignite the Hutch-Kinahan feud to some degree. So maybe we can just talk in more general terms about what's likely to come next.
Corollaries, I don't even know what that word means.
It's like
so
offshoots.
I'm learning how to speak English from you, Ciaran.
Oh, well.
I told him I used the word cogent the other day, and he had difficulties with that one as well. So every day is a school day for Healy here.
I'll tell you what.
Corollaries. God, I don't even know what the question was. That just totally blind. Well, in terms of the price on on Gerry Hutch's head. Well, you know a bit about that, but yeah, there definitely is a price on his head.
I'm more than satisfied that the Kinahan cartel want Gerry Hutch dead. I do believe they've offered money, because we know from previous cases they have offered money, for example, to people in the North Inner City, not to kill the Hutches, but to offer information, small bits of information. They're talking, 10 grand for bits and bobs of information. So the Kinahans, in my opinion, want Gerry Hutch dead. The Kinahans, the guards would say there's a very serious threat on the life of Gerry Hutch, and there must be on the life of Patsy Hutch, because we know there's a permanent post, a community reassurance post, the guards would call it, on Patsy Hutch's house. The guards don't do that for as a hobby. They're doing it because they have intelligence. So the Kinahan cartel, even though they're degraded, and Daniel Kinahan could be arrested tomorrow and put on in a yellow orange jumpsuit and sent over to New York to face charges there, won't really affect the main cartel, because it's a cartel and they're worth up to €1 billion and they have money to do whatever they want. So the Kinahan threat to Gerry Hutch is extremely severe, and it will be, I believe, for quite some time.
Okay. Yeah, well, if Daniel Kinahan is sent to New York, at least we've got someone here to cover it. There's a couple of very last ones here. There's one from Jim Bob that I think we'll probably cover at another point, but Jim Bob was asking about, can you do a bit of a who's who for the Hutch family, because it's very confusing for us non-Hutch experts. But Mick, you want to jump in? Oh, he's got
I'm not going to say what it is. This is a bit of intelligence. Well, it's my own intelligence, but we built up a picture. So Gerry Hutch had 7. He was from a family of 8 children. Now, 4 are deceased, I believe. But essentially, Patsy Hutch is the father. Patrick Hutch, who's one of Gerry's older brothers. He is the father of Gerry Hutch, who was the key Kinahan associate who was murdered by the Kinahan cartel in September 2015 in Spain. He's also the father of Derek Delboy Hutch, who's a convicted killer who served time in an Irish jail for manslaughter. And after the murder of Gerry Hutch, he got out of prison for the funeral, but then shortly afterwards, he was attacked by members of the Kinahan cartel in Mountjoy, or associates, people paid by the Kinahan cartel, basically, in Mountjoy prison. That was September, maybe early October 2015. We broke that story, I seem to recall. And then in December, he was attacked again and somebody saved his life. So there were 2 efforts on his life in Mountjoy prison. He was then moved to Wheatfield after that. So that's Derek Delboy. He is also the father of Patrick Hutch Jr., who, as we know, was charged with the murder of David Byrne. It was alleged that he was the man dressed as a woman. Now, there was an Ollie Prosecco entered after that, after the death of lead investigator, Detective Superintendent Colin Fox. So that is Gary, Derek Delboy and Patrick. They're Patsy's children. Then Eddie Hutch, who was Gerry and Patrick's brother, he was murdered on the 8th of February at his house in North Inner City, Dublin. And he would be the father of Ross Hutch and several others, but notably Ross Hutch, who a few weeks ago was jailed for 10 years for two really bad assaults. He slashed a man, and it was a vicious attack. That was a personal thing. Then Derek Hutch, who was Gerry's brother, who took his own life. He was a very serious criminal himself, convicted rapist. He, in 2007, I think it was, he went into Store Street Guard Station, confessed to a murder, told Gardaí he had been involved in a murder and secretly buried somebody. And then he went and then he took his own life. But he would be the father of Derek Coakley Hutch, who was one of the victims of the feud. He was shot dead in January 2018 outside Wheatfield Prison. So he was known as Derek Hutch, or Derek Coakley Hutch. And then John, who is another brother of Eddie and Gerry and Patrick. John he died a couple of years ago. There was a permanent post on his house, but he tragically died. He fell. I think he suffered something and he fell down the stairs and died. But his son was Gareth Hutch, who was murdered by the Kinahan cartel in May 2017. He is also the father of Jonathan Hutch, who Paul was talking about earlier in relation to, he was named in the trial. And Jonathan Hutch, the other sort of newsworthy aspect of Jonathan, who hasn't been charged with anything, but Jonathan Hutch was the target of the Kinahan cartel in August 2017 in Spain when they tried to kill him and they murdered an innocent man called Trevor O'Neill. So it's quite arcane, but it's a very, very tight-knit family. There were Gerry had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and I'm just looking, John's dead, Derek's dead, and Eddie's dead, so he's lost 3 brothers. And I think he has one sister as well. But that's basically it. So there were 8 siblings in the Hutch family, and it all spread out from there.
They're a fascinating family, aren't they? Yeah.
Very sad.
Yeah. A lot of tragedy there.
Yeah, a lot of tragedy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's don't ever underplay that. Okay, we have one final question here from the appallingly named Blue Mooning. There are far too many City fans listening to this podcast, Mick. I'm sure you're absolutely delighted.
I wonder why.
But Blue Meaning asks, can you ask the guys, does the abuse that they get on social media personally bother them in any way, or is it water off a duck's back? Now, look, I mean, really, the reason I wanted to ask this is because it's been a very hot topic. It's obviously raised a lot of debate, a lot of anger in some spheres of Irish life. And I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on it.
So I got grief last week. We ran a picture. People will know about this. We ran a picture of Gerry Hutch before the verdict with a beard, and people went nuts about it. And you do get grief. Now, my attitude is, I advise other journalists. See, when you're getting grief on Twitter, just say nothing. See, when it's happening to you, it's slightly different. You do get sort of, it does start to annoy you. But what I have found, it comes and it goes. Twitter is like people have the attention span of a goldfish bowl. They'll hock you for a couple of hours or a couple of days, and then they'll move on to somebody else. So I always say, just let it sort of settle down, and things move on. Paul got it earlier this week. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want to give you one sort of example of why it's a bit mad. Social media is a bit mad. Before Paul did the Hutch trial, I did the Dwyer trial in 2015, and I was doing the same, and I was doing all the tweets and all this stuff, and it was the first real time that a case had been live tweeted. Okay, and people were going, "Oh, Mick, it's fantastic." And I was looking at the justified comments Paul was getting, and I remember I was laughing because I was getting them then. But at the end, right, I realised people on Twitter, sadly, or social media, they want to see the news that they agree with or that matches their morals. So I always go, "Michael, your tweets have been fantastic. We're sending you templates for covering court reports." So at the end, when Dwyer was convicted, I went into journalist mode and I sent out a tweet going, "Now is the time for anybody who has any information about Graham Dwyer to message me in confidence," right? And I got absolutely hockeyed from a height, and people were going, "You absolute scumbag, why are you doing this?" So that went against their moral code. But I'm sorry, it's what journalists do. So it was a big lesson for me. One day you're a hero and the next day you're a villain. So you have to sort of try and treat both with the same level. Yeah, it's grand. If it's good, it's grand. If it's bad, well, it moves on.
You're a bit like Batman. You've lived long enough to see yourself turn from hero to villain. Yeah.
No, I sort of, when people, no, but I do find that, I'd get a lot of praise for some stories I do. Like, say, I've done lots of stories about Garda corruption, right? And it's hilarious. I've done more stories about Garda corruption this year than any other journalist, but I still get accused of being a Garda mouthpiece, ignoring Garda corruption. I did one yesterday about a Garda arrested at the airport. I did one about a Garda under suspicion for spending 300 quid attacking another Garda's house. I did one, loads of ones I've done in the last year. And people will still go, "Mick, you ignore Garda corruption." I'm Mr. Garda corruption reporting this year. So people only see what they want to see. So when people hawk you or when people praise you, you sort of try and treat them both the same way, because people can be quite irrational in that sense, that they'll go, "You're brilliant," and then a minute later you're a scum.
Yeah. I agree with everything Mick has said. Think it got a little rough, shall we say, when we published the first pictures of Gerry Hutch out and about, and I still stand by the publication of those pictures and the right of my colleague to take those pictures. Gerry Hutch hasn't shied away. He has been out and about in public. He knows he's a public figure. I don't think he really cares too much about being photographed. He might care about people around him being photographed, or the property that he's residing in being identified. Those are legitimate concerns, and that's not something we sought to do. But when people turned around, only a handful of people, in fairness, but it does get to you a little bit when people turn around and accuse you of, quote unquote, trying to get somebody murdered. I have never done that. I will never try to get anybody murdered. And to accuse me of that is just disgusting. And it says more about you as a person that you would accuse me of trying to get somebody killed. But that does not reflect the majority. You have to remind yourself that most people that comment, generally they're commenting to say something negative. So the only thing I'll say is I was heartened by, when we did this Q&A, and then in the immediate aftermath of doing the trial, the amount of well wishes that we both received vastly outweighed all of the negative comments. Whatever, people can have their opinion. You can disagree with everything I do and what I do for a living. That's fine. You're entitled to that. You can say whatever you want. It's water off a duck's back 90% of the time. But don't accuse me of trying to get somebody murdered. Never ever would that. I should really go without saying, but I nearly feel bad for even addressing this. But it's just fucking ridiculous that anyone would suggest that. But that it's not reflective of the majority.
No, and it is. I got that as well, because the first picture we had, obviously he walked out of the prison or of the court with the full hair and the beard, but people hadn't seen that until we ran that picture, and it was. I thought it was it's as if suddenly the Kinahan cartel are going to go, "Oh, that's what he looks like." People, and then when we got the pictures, and by the way, every journalist in Dublin was chasing that. We all got plenty of messages from journalists going, "Ah, geez, that's a great story. We were the first ones to get him." And he had his hair shaved and his head shaved, or his face shaved and his haircut, right? And then now it was, you're trying to get him killed because you've shown pictures of him shaved and shorn. I think the Kinahan cartel know what he looks like. They're a big lad. You know what I mean? So there's no logic to it. But anyway, what I will say is, look, I've never known of any journalist being dissuaded from writing a story because they were worried that Johnny X4312719 on Twitter thinks you're a bollocks. And it is usually men. I'm sorry, lads. It is usually men who act the muppet.
Well, I tell you what, Johnny X417329 is one of my favourite people on Twitter, so you don't come after me, pal. But no, I think, I this was part what we had kind of hoped would come from the podcast recently about the career in crime journalism, is that I think it's important to remember that it's not as if Mick and Paul, etc., are going out writing, finding a photo and then just immediately publishing it. There are so many processes that have to go through, not least at being a gatekeeper yourself, as knowing what you can and can't report, what you should and shouldn't report, etc., etc. So I just think it's important to reiterate that, there's a lot that goes into this before it gets onto the front page or it gets onto the website as well. But there we go. But listen, lads. Yeah, but
I just want to reiterate that point. Sorry, you can disagree with us till the cows come home. You can think that we're scumbags and that our job is not worth doing. That's fine. You're entitled to that opinion. But if you're going to take it that extra step and accuse us of trying to have people killed, And
I did laugh. Some people were saying, "Leave him alone. What he is doing, leave him alone." But they were happily tweeting about them themselves. So I was like, sorry, so you can tweet to beat the band, but professional journalists can't do anything about him. I don't think you thought that would done out there, big lad. Anyway,
leave it there.
There you go.
Well, there we are. Yeah. Sinead, as they say. Listen, first of all, thank you very much for your time. The listeners will probably be getting this in 2 or possibly 3 parts, given the absolute marathon this has been. But thank you very much for your time once again and for your reporting this week. We do want to say once again that obviously we're really blown away by the uptake for what we're doing here. We really love doing these pods for you guys. And if you do get the opportunity to tell anyone else, any friends, family that you might want to listen as well, who might get something out of it, we'd be enormously grateful. But in the meantime, I'd like to say thank you to Paul. Thank you to Mick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will speak to you soon. Take care. If you like what you've heard today, please subscribe to Shattered Lives wherever you get your podcasts.